Making the decision to switch your pet from dry kibble to a raw meat-based diet can feel like a big one. And picking whether to feed a pre-made raw over making it yourself at home can feel just as big. There are important differences between pre-made and homemade raw diets, so in this video, I'll be going over the 3 key differences between the two so you can get a clearer vision on how the transition may go depending on which you choose, and may also help you decide what you want to stick with. Number 1, pre-made raw is ground, homemade raw is chunked. The raw diet, both pre-made and homemade, consists of raw bone, muscle meats, organ meats, and depending on the brand or what you choose to add in, fish, shellfish, egg, kelp, some plant matter, and synthetic nutrients. So one of the main differences between the two is that pre-made is usually ground up and sometimes portioned into patties, and homemade is chunked whole pieces, unless of course you choose to grind it yourself. So what are the pros and cons between ground pre-made grinds and chunked homemade raw? Since pre-made raw is formulated, ground, and packaged for your convenience, it will often be more expensive than buying individual ingredients yourself. When it comes to the transition, however, pre-made raw may be a lot more palatable, as its consistency is similar to canned food. This, however, brings us to another con of ground pre-made raw, and that's the loss of a teeth cleaning effect. When pets eat a chunked raw diet, especially with whole pieces of raw meaty bones, it greatly aids in scraping any tartar off the teeth as they chew. If you feed a diet of only grinds, you will need to brush your pet's teeth regularly. Number 2, pre-made raw is balanced for you, homemade raw is balanced by you. As I mentioned earlier, pre-made raw is prepared conveniently for the owner so they can plate and serve. This means as long as the label says it's complete and balanced to AAFCO or Feedive standards, it doesn't need anything else added to it. This is a great burden off of many owners' shoulders as they want to feed raw but are too afraid to balance the meals themselves. But with this pro comes a con as well. Pet owners tend to want to switch their pet to a raw diet because it's made up of species-appropriate raw meats and unprocessed fresh food ingredients. A diet made up of only fresh food ingredients is best achieved by feeding a homemade raw diet because you can add in whole foods to balance, like kelp for iodine, oily fish for omega-3s, and mussels for manganese. When it comes to a balanced pre-made raw, however, many are going to contain at least some synthetic nutrients to fill nutritional gaps rather than whole foods. This of course isn't bad, but if you want your pet to receive bioavailable nutrients through whole foods, the best way to do this is by making a homemade diet. Number 3, pre-made raw comes as a single animal protein. Homemade raw can be unlimited. When you're transitioning your pet from a processed diet to a fresh food diet, it may take their digestive system a little time to get used to it. Because of this, it's always suggested to feed a single white meat protein like chicken or turkey during the transition and introduce new proteins slowly. This makes pre-made raw a great first choice as they're commonly single protein formulas anyway. Of course, this is definitely achievable with a homemade raw diet as well. You just may need to add a few other supplements to fill nutritional gaps, since other than liver, it's difficult to find another secreting organ from chicken or turkey. Ultimately, once your pet is fully transitioned, the goal is to rotate different protein sources for flavor and nutrient variety. So whichever method you choose, try to provide your pet with a variety of protein sources when you can. If you're still unsure and just want my opinion, I would suggest offering a few chunks of raw meats to their kibble or canned food to get them used to the taste and texture. If they don't seem interested, you may want to start out with a pre-made raw that's a bit more familiar texture. If you want to stay on pre-made raw, great. But if you want to switch to homemade, slowly start adding in small chunks of muscle meats and meaty bones to their commercial raw until they get used to it. Then you can slowly transition. If they do take to the chunks and you're confident in making a homemade meal, start offering samples of meaty bones, muscle meats, and very small amounts of organ meats to their kibble. Once your pet gets used to them, you'll have a bit more clarity when switching from commercial food to a homemade raw diet. If you need a more in-depth look at pros and cons of pre-made raw and homemade raw, watch this video.